There is a specific moment almost everyone recognizes but rarely names. You are in a room and something is said that is wrong or unkind or simply untrue, and you feel the correct response rise in your chest and you swallow it. Not because you lack the words, because some older, quieter calculation runs first, faster than thought, and it asks a single question before you're allowed to speak. Will this cost me their approval? And if the answer is yes, the true thing stays exactly where it was, unsaid, and you smile instead, and the room stays comfortable, and something in you gets smaller without announcing that it happened. This has been happening for so long that most people no longer notice the transaction. They call it being agreeable, being easy to get along with, a virtue even, the way politeness is a virtue. But there is a difference between kindness and the specific, constant, exhausting labor of managing what other people think of you. And almost nobody was ever taught to tell the two apart. Kindness costs you nothing of your actual self. It is freely given and it survives disagreement. What most people practice instead is something else entirely, a low continuous tax paid to avoid the discomfort of being disliked. And the tax is not paid in money. It is paid in the slow cumulative disappearance of a person who used to exist before the payment started. Consider what actually happens inside a person who has spent years optimizing for likability. Every opinion gets a second, hidden draft, run silently before the spoken one, checking for offense, checking for edges, checking for anything that might cause someone, somewhere, to think less of them. Over enough repetitions, this hidden draft stops feeling like a filter and starts feeling like the person's actual personality. They genuinely believe they agree with everyone because disagreement was edited out so early in the process that they never got to feel it as a real, competing thought. This is not diplomacy. This is a kind of quiet self erasure, performed so gradually and so consistently that the person doing it rarely notices the self being erased. Only a persistent, low grade sense that something about their life feels thin, borrowed, provisional, as though they are perpetually auditioning for a role they were never actually given. Soren Kierkegaard, writing in the middle of the 19th century, diagnosed a version of this with unusual precision. He observed that most people live according to what he called the aesthetic stage of existence, a mode of living oriented entirely around pleasure, comfort, and the avoidance of anything that might disturb the surface of a pleasant life. The aesthetic person does not choose values. They drift, taking whatever mood or opinion the room currently offers, because committing to a genuine position risks friction, and friction is the one thing the aesthetic life cannot tolerate. Kierkegaard did not consider this a peaceful way to live. He considered it a slow, low grade despair, precisely because the aesthetic person never actually becomes anyone. They remain a surface, endlessly adjusting to reflect whatever is currently in front of them, and a surface, no matter how pleasant, is not a self. The alternative Kierkegaard proposed was not cruelty, and it was never about becoming difficult for its own sake. He called it the ethical stage, and later, the deeper religious or existential stage. But the mechanism underneath both is the same. At some point, a person has to choose. Not choose a mood, not choose whichever position keeps the room comfortable, but choose an actual standing commitment to something true, and hold that commitment even when holding it costs them the room's approval. This is where the discomfort most people spend their entire lives avoiding actually lives. Not in conflict itself, but in the specific, unbearable sensation of being disliked by someone whose approval you have organized your personality around receiving. Here is the part almost no one explains honestly, the part that makes this genuinely difficult rather than a simple motivational instruction to just be yourself. The moment you stop editing your true position for approval, you will, with near total certainty, become less likable to a specific portion of the people around you, not because you became worse, because the previous version of you was, in a real sense, constructed for their comfort, and comfort, once withdrawn, is noticed and resented. People do not simply tolerate a change in someone they have relied on to be agreeable. They often actively punish it, with distance, with subtle exclusion, with the particular coldness reserved for someone who has stopped playing their assigned part. This is not a hypothetical risk. This is the actual, predictable cost of the thing being described, and any account of this that skips past that cost is not being honest with you. But here is what almost nobody weighs correctly against that cost, because the cost is loud and immediate, while the alternative is quiet and slow. The version of you built for approval was never actually loved. It was managed. People who like the agreeable version of you are, in a very real sense, in relationship with a performance, not a person, and the affection they offer, however genuine it feels, is conditional on the performance continuing exactly as rehearsed. This is a fragile kind of connection because it requires constant, ongoing maintenance, an endless renewal of the same small betrayals of your actual position indefinitely for as long as the relationship continues. It is exhausting in a way that rarely gets named directly because the exhaustion is distributed so evenly across so many small moments that it never accumulates into a single identifiable complaint. It just accumulates into a life that feels quietly like it belongs to someone else. There is a specific psychological cost to this that goes beyond exhaustion, and it deserves to be named plainly. A person who has spent years optimizing every position for approval eventually loses the ability to locate their own actual opinion on anything that matters. Not because they became stupid or shallow, because the muscle required to hold an unpopular position long enough to discover whether its true atrophies from disuse, the same way any capacity atrophies when it is never exercised. This is the specific, quiet tragedy underneath a life spent chasing likability. It does not simply cost you other people's full respect. It eventually costs you access to your own mind because you have spent so long asking what others will think that you have forgotten how to ask what you actually think. And by the time the question finally matters enough to answer honestly, in a moment that demands a real position, many people discover they no longer know how to locate one. This is what Kierkegaard meant when he wrote about the anxiety of possibility, the specific dread that arrives the moment a person realizes they are actually free to choose who they become, rather than simply continuing to be whoever the room currently needs them to be. Freedom, in this sense, is not comfortable. It is closer to standing at the edge of something with no railing, because the moment you commit to an actual position, you have removed the safety of being whatever is currently convenient, and you are now, for the first time, actually exposed to being disliked for something real rather than merely tolerated for something performed. The reframe worth sitting with is this. Becoming less liked by people who only valued your performance is not a loss. It is closer to a correction, a return of accurate information into a relationship that was previously operating on false data. The people who withdraw when you stop performing were never actually connected to you. They were connected to the labor you were performing on their behalf, and losing access to that labor, while genuinely painful, is not the same as losing something real. What replaces it, for the people who remain, and for the ones who arrive afterward, is something the performed version of you was never capable of producing. Connection to something real, rather than approval of something managed. None of this is a call to become needlessly difficult, or to mistake abrasiveness for authenticity, which is its own kind of performance, just aimed at a different, smaller audience impressed by contrarianism instead of agreeableness. The actual work is quieter and harder than either extreme. It is the slow, repeated practice of noticing the hidden draft before it edits your true position into something safer, and choosing, in that specific moment, to say the truer thing instead, even at a smaller and more survivable cost than you feared. Not every time, not perfectly, but often enough that the muscle stops atrophying and starts slowly to remember what it felt like to hold a position because it was true rather than because it was safe. If you have spent years managing what people think of you, and something in this description felt uncomfortably familiar rather than merely interesting, that discomfort is not a sign you are broken. It is the same discomfort Kierkegaard described standing at the edge of every genuine choice a person is ever asked to make. The room will not always approve of what's on the other side of that choice. But the room was never who you were actually supposed to become someone for. If this reached you at the exact moment you needed it, tell me honestly in the comments. What is one true thing you have been editing out of every room you enter, because saying it might cost you being liked? Cura animi, cure of the soul. Bring your own ledger to the next examination.
Subscribe to join the reflection and welcome to the channel.